Welcome to Pop Crime TV's The Outlier podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Conlin, and today I have a follow-up episode to my January 2025 episode titled Decades of Darkness, Utah's Ritual Abuse Scandal and the Alleged Crimes of David Lee Hamblin. Since I released that episode, I have spoken to a survivor of David Lee Hamblin who really amplified a lot of these allegations. I also spoke to someone who happened to be in a therapy group with Hamblin over Zoom, and I don't know much about this group, but she happened to come across a TikTok I made about the case, and she was like, wait, what? I had no idea about this guy, and I was like, wow, that is very concerning. Yes, I'm aware that he is innocent until proven guilty, but it's just wild to me that he can pretty much blend into his surroundings at this point, and people that are involved in different groups that he's in just have no idea of what he's been accused of. For obvious reasons, this case is not overly publicized, but I did manage to get to the Utah case docket, and David Lee Hamblin's pre-trial hearing begins this month, February 19th, 2025 at 1 p.m. This is a huge deal. Judge Mandy Larson will preside over the case and determine if these charges are sufficient enough to officially go to trial. I am a little concerned because Judge Larson released Hamblin on bail or house arrest. So in my opinion, that's really not a good sign. Someone that is accused of crimes as heinous as these involving children should really be hanging out in a jail cell until their trial, in my opinion. But I've reached out to some local reporters, namely Fox 13. Their coverage has been incredible when it comes to David Lee Hamblin. So hopefully they'll get back to me because I would love to speak with them since I'm assuming they're going to be in the courtroom as they are local. So I will be following that and hopefully have updates to provide everybody here. But let's briefly go back to 1990 and then 1991, when something that is now referred to as, quote, the Pace Memo was written and then subsequently leaked to the media or publicized. In my opinion, this Pace Memo is more evidence and proof that child satanic ritualistic abuse exists and has existed for a long time. I mentioned in episode 1 that in May of this year, finally, a law will go into effect criminalizing this type of child abuse. And yes, it's taken this long. But back to the Pace Memo, Glenn Pace, he was a bishop and a general authority in the Mormon Church, or the Jesus Christ Church of Latter-day Saints. And Glenn Pace wrote a confidential memo to the Latter-day Saints leadership on ritualistic child abuse among Mormons. This memo that he wrote summarizes over 50 interviews that Bishop Pace had with people over the course of a year who said they were abused in Utah, California, Mexico, and various other locations. Some victims told him that they were, quote, baptized in blood to cancel their Mormon baptism, and among these alleged ritualistic abusers, according to Pace, were members of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. The Pace Memo actually describes incidents of this ritualized abuse and even claims of human sacrifice. Pace would state that he was convinced at least 800 members of the church were involved or had knowledge of this abuse, including bishops, a diocese president, patriarchs, temple workers, members of the church's young women and young men's group, and again, members of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. Pace said that he believed the purpose of the torture of children was to cause disassociation. He said, as a result of the disassociation, children would, quote, develop a new personality to enable them to endure various forms of abuse. Quote, "The basic objective is premeditated, to systematically and methodically torture and terrorize children until they are forced to disassociate. The torture is not a consequence of a loss of temper, but the execution of well-planned, well-thought-out rituals often performed by close relatives. The only escape for the children is to disassociate." End quote. Once the Pace Memo was leaked to the public a year later in 1991, the Mormon Church was very quick to dismiss the claims made by Pace. And keep in mind, again, he researched this for over a year, speaking to over 50 people. And the Mormon Church spokesperson at the time, Don Lefebvre, told the Chicago Tribune, quote, "It seems to me that even though one actual case is tragic and is one too many, the reports of ritualistic killings are likely overblown, whether they be in connection with members of our church, of other churches, or any significant segment of society, none of which is immune." End quote. Glenn Pace had even told the media himself that he was skeptical of these allegations until he spent a year interviewing the survivors, many who suffered from dissociated identity disorder and various psychological traumas as a result of the abuse. I've linked out the Pace Memo in the episode notes, and it's just wild that everything in that memo echoes the Hamblin sisters' victim impact statement. So there was allegedly this investigation in 1992 after the memo was released, but the claims were unsubstantiated. And of course, I'm sure they leaned on how, quote, outlandish and absurd these claims are, as they always do, but how devastating to the people that were actually brave enough to come forward. I know that when I read about the children disassociating, it just made me cry. The gaslighting that was done to them, and they don't know any different. It really just makes me so sick and so sad. And I would hate to think that this is still going on, but unfortunately, I believe that it is, which is another reason why I'm doing this podcast. But let's pivot. Let's discuss former Utah County Attorney David Leavitt. You heard about him quite a bit in my former episode, but I didn't get to finish the 2022 feud between Leavitt and the Utah County Sheriff's Office, namely between Leavitt and Sheriff Mike Smith and Sergeant Spencer Cannon. I left you with the cringiest, most contradictory press conference given by David Leavitt about a week before he lost the election, calling for Smith and Cannon to be investigated or resign because of Leavitt's belief that they leaked the 2012 Hamblin sister victim impact statement to either Nicholas Rossi, Alaverdian, Arthur Knight, or one of his lawyers. Although Leavitt admittedly said in his press conference he had no proof of this. And Leavitt also essentially named himself as a suspect and said he was being investigated. And man, he was just called out and ripped apart by the reporters who closely covered the case. And then later on June 1st, 2022, Sheriff Mike Smith would give a rebuttal press conference where he's basically like, no, we're law enforcement. If you're the actual subject of an investigation, why the hell would we tell you? Why would we tip you off? And I'm paraphrasing. He didn't exactly say that, but he makes a lot of sense. And I'm going to play you Mike Smith's presser for reference on 1.25 speed. And it is much shorter than David Leavitt's presser because if you ask me, Smith is not trying to convince anyone of anything. There is no convincing. It is cut, dry, right to the point. Whereas Leavitt seemed to be trying to convince or convey his innocence or just showcase that he was a victim in general.
Good afternoon. Thanks for someone else. This isn't something that we would usually hold a press conference on this case because of the integrity of the case, but due to the fact that the press conference was held earlier today, we feel that we need to answer some of the questions that were brought up and accusations that were brought up. I want to start with reading the original press release that we gave out yesterday. It states, in April of 2021, an investigation began into ritualistic child sexual abuse and child sex trafficking that occurred in Utah County. The ensuing investigation discovered that other victims had previously reported similar forms of ritualistic sexual abuse and trafficking that occurred in Utah County, Juat County, and Sanpete County during the time between 1990 and 2010. Portions of these allegations were confirmed. These allegations are being investigated by the Utah County Sheriff's Office in cooperation with other local and federal agencies. We are pleading with the public and encourage victims or individuals with knowledge of these crimes to contact the Utah County Sheriff's Office Special Victims Unit so that they can be offered all the assistance possible. We understand that there are individuals who have concerns for their safety and well-being and who have been silenced. We need your help. That was our release. That was the entirety of our release. Accusations that go beyond that statement are false. This is what we released. I want to hit a couple bullet points a couple notes I made that are in reference to the press conference that Mr. Leavitt just gave. First off, this is not a politically motivated investigation. Approximately a year ago, victims came forward to us with reporting crimes similar to those that are involved in the case Mr. Leavitt got today. As we investigated those crimes, they led us to the case that Mr. Leavitt has brought up today and has actually identified himself in today. As we looked further into it, we found corroborating evidence that these things had happened and needed to be further investigated. I believe, that Leavitt is using his authority and his pulpit to bully, distract, and mischaracterize the facts of an ongoing investigation. Right now, the agencies that are working together on this case include Utah County Sheriff's Office, Provo Police Department, Juat County Sheriff's Office, Sanpete County Sheriff's Office, Nephi City Police Department, and the FBI. Our Special Victims Unit is tasked with this as the lead. They are very confident and professional. I have full confidence in them that they will investigate this thoroughly and completely, and they will go where the evidence leads. In an earlier press conference, we were accused of misusing public funds and in the investigation of child sexual abuse. I will tell you right now, I think that this is probably the best way we could use public funds is to investigate child sexual abuse. I make no excuses for that and never will. Since we posted our investigation yesterday, we have been contacted by no less than 20 people who state that they were either victims of this crime or have knowledge of others who were victims. The main focus of this investigation, don't be misled by statements being made by Mr. Leavitt that are sensational. The main focus of this investigation is child sexual abuse. Several times David Leavitt named himself and mentioned cannibalism and murder. This investigation is about child sexual abuse. Mr. Leavitt referred to documents that he believes we have released. This office has released no documents. There is a process for records to be released through GRAMA, which is a proper process. Nothing has come out of the Sheriff's Office. We have released nothing to the public. I take exception to any victim who comes forward and is characterized as tragically mentally ill. How dare you? These are victims of crime who have mustered the courage to come forward, and this is what we call them, as mentally ill, are victims of crime. How dare you? They should not be shamed or intimidated for having the courage to come forward. When we investigate cases at the Utah County Sheriff's Office, we do not discuss the names of victims, and we do not discuss the names of suspects. That is not how we conduct business. We did not release any names in association with this case. If they have been released, that did not come from this office. Nicholas Rossi, who also goes by Arthur Knight, claimed to have exclusive confirmation from our public information officer naming suspects in the case we are investigating. Sergeant Cannon did not discuss or confirm names of either victims or suspects with him. Again, we do not do that. As of about an hour ago, we've actually received a text message from this individual apologizing for releasing that information and naming the Sheriff's Office and Spencer Cannon as confirming information. So with that said, for what it's worth, neither I will not be resigning, and Spencer Cannon will not be disciplined for doing his job. I'll open it up at this time for any questions.
Based on your current investigation, do you believe these claims were properly investigated at the time?
From what we can see, we believe that portions of it were properly investigated, but we do not believe the entirety of it was thoroughly investigated.
When you said today you're investigating child abuse, are you still including that word, ritualistic?
Yes.
From that?
Yes.
Sheriff Smith, is this bigger than the one case involving the therapist that Lev was talking about?
Yes, it is.
How so? Can you elaborate any further? Your press release was vague.
There are multiple victims involved in this case, and there are multiple victims cooperating information between their accounts.
Is David Levitt, yes or no, a subject of your investigation?
As I stated, we don't talk about who's in the investigation.
Can you describe the FBI's involvement? When did they get involved?
We formed this task force, and we presented the case to them, and they've been involved now for a couple weeks in the investigation.
Levitt specifically talked about a case involving animal poaching that was done for ritualistic. He says that's the extent of it. Can you give any more specifics about what were the rituals, what was going on with the sex?
Yeah, I'm not going to get into the specifics, no, but I find it disturbing that I listened to that, and I think David Leavitt said some things that were very alarming to me in that, and contradicted himself several times in that account. But no, I'm not going to get into specifics. I don't think that's fair to the investigation at this point. I think what David Leavitt did was very fair and possibly tainted this investigation.
He does bring up a point, though. Ballots are 7 days away from going out. Why is the sheriff's office releasing this right now?
We have come to a point in this investigation. For us, we investigate crime. This has nothing to do with policies or whatever he wants to deflect it upon. We investigate crime. That is our job. And we've come to a point in this investigation where we know there are other victims out there. We've had several reach out to us, and we were right. We released this, and we've had over 20 reach out to us. That's why.
Why do you think Mr. Leavitt is bringing this up now?
I don't know. I can't answer that.
What happens after your sheriff coming out to your let on us take a work investigation, calling for your resign on Tuesday?
We will continue to do our job. Again, we won't be intimidated by Mr. Leavitt, by his attempts to derail our investigation. We will continue to do our jobs.
Can you elaborate on why you think he's trying to derail your investigation?
It's a good question. It's one of those questions that sometimes make you say, but I don't know why.
Has he been cooperating in your investigation?
We have not reached out to Mr. Leavitt about this investigation.
So he makes it seem that these are imaginations of a mentally ill person. Can you tell us anything that would refute that?
Well, I guess my question would be, what's your basis for that statement? Do you have knowledge that this person is mentally ill? How could you say that about someone when admittedly you haven't had contact with them for how many years did you say? Multiple years. I don't think any time in adulthood. What is your basis for that statement? I'd throw that right back in his face. That is an unfair and unprofessional statement. And honestly, coming from a county attorney to put that out there to people who come forward, even if you've been victimized to a point where it is tragically sickening that you're just going to be labeled as mentally ill, that's disturbing.
Was your victim who came forward in April 2021 the same victim from the therapist rape case?
No.
And did your agency handle that therapist rape case?
The original?
Yeah.
No. So we did not.
I guess I just go ahead.
Well, he said that these claims were so outlandish that they were not seriously investigated by the County Sex Crimes Task Force. Is that true?
No, that is not true. They were investigated seriously. He is correct that they were never prosecuted, but they were dismissed without prejudice. The case is still there.
Can you share any more information about the nature of the dismissal? Because he wasn't able to.
I'm not going to get into that right now.
You and Levitt have been at odds at multiple points. Why shouldn't voters just chalk this up to politics?
They can choose. That is not our focus here. This is not a political. We've been working on this. This is something that we take very, very seriously. This is something that, this is some of the most egregious crimes that happen in our community is when our children are victimized to this level. And we will look into this. If you can label it and deflect, say whatever you want, we will continue to investigate this.
Mr. Leavitt said that the case against the therapist was expunged. Is that your understanding of the status of that case? Because you just said it's still there, it's just without prejudice.
Yeah, the case was dismissed without prejudice.
But it was not expunged?
I don't know if they've expunged it out of the court records or not.
If it's expunged, does that hamper your investigation in any way?
I don't believe so. Like we have new victims coming forward.
And you said what it said in its presser, distributing into consultation investigation. How do you maintain it?
Well, he said a lot of things in that investigation. He released a lot of information. He did. That we never would have released.
Do you think he should resign? Do you want you to resign?
No, I'm not going to play that game with him. I'm going to do my job, the job that people elected me to do, and I'm not going to stoop to the kindergarten games with him.
Can you give us any, he had mentioned that this guy was in the church and that he'd been excommunicated when he found out about poaching allegations. Can you give us any idea? You're obviously alleging there is some sort of a sex abuse ring that went on for 30 years in 3 counties. Can you give us anything about the structure of that ring? People are confused, the Facebook comments, people say it sounds made up. Can you give us anything about the structure of this?
Unfortunately, I can't this time. This is an active investigation, and we're not going to release that.
Is there a group that was involved?
That's a fair statement.
Does it involve high-profile Utah County officials?
I'm not going to comment on any names at all.
Or just broadly, you can't say?
I'm going to say,
So how does this work with him being a county attorney? You get to the point where you want to file charges. How do you go about that?
we will seek help from the Attorney General's office as well as other county attorneys to conflict this case out.
Would you be okay handing off the investigation to another agency due to conflict?
If that's what needed to happen, absolutely. My focus is that this investigation happens. And so far, I don't believe it has received the attention that it needs.
Do you have any idea how it is that this Nicholas Rossi person has access to or information about some of the records in this case?
I don't, but through grandma you can get records. So if you know where the original case resides, you could grandma that case and get that information. So I don't know how he got it. I have no idea.
When do you think the case on the alleged sex ring might be finished?
I can't answer that. We will do a thorough investigation into that. I cannot answer when it will get on, but it will get our full attention. Okay, thank you for coming out today. I appreciate your time.
Now that press conference was less cringy. And keep in mind, the investigation that he was referring to was namely David Lee Hamblin, and Hamblin was arrested just a few months later. I mentioned that this press conference was June 1st, 2022, and by June 8th, the Utah County Commission did vote against launching an internal investigation into Utah County Attorney David Leavitt and also Sheriff Mike Smith. Members of the Utah County Sheriff's Office also raised concerns at the time that an internal investigation could interfere with the ongoing criminal case. But it's safe to say that the Utah County Sheriff's Office was not investigated, and neither was David Leavitt. But let me share something with you that recently pissed me off. I'm watching a series on Investigation Discovery, and I love all of their shows, and I really like this show. This show is called The Curious Case of. And they did an episode on Nicholas Rossi, Nicholas Alaverdian, Arthur Knight. And look, he is allegedly this mastermind criminal, an alleged rapist. Yes, but he did not make up the allegations about David Leavitt and his wife. He leaked them. So David Leavitt is actually interviewed for this show about Nicholas Rossi and his alleged crimes, and David Leavitt really leans into playing the victim. He kind of says two contrasting statements. At one point, he leans into the fact that, oh, Nicholas Rossi made these up to get back at me. He wants a new prosecutor because I'm too experienced, and he wants a less experienced prosecutor. And oh, he's also using this defense attorney that I fired, and that's why they're trying to get back to me. And then he says, oh, actually, wait, the Utah County Sheriff's Office was colluding with Rossi to investigate me on all of these claims, and they were working together because it was right before the election. And I'm just like, well, wait, which is it? Did he make these up, or was he colluding with the Sheriff's Office? I don't understand, Leavitt. But ID, they failed to provide the fact that these claims were made in 2012, and Leavitt was never the subject of any investigation. It was the investigation into David Lee Hamblin. And it seemed like things kind of got twisted so he could really share his version of events. Oh, and they also don't mention Leavitt moving out of the country after all of this. And, you know, he says Rossi ruined his career and his reputation. And I would be like Dan Abrams. I would follow that up with, well, I hope you're suing him for defamation. Nope. No evidence that David Leavitt is suing him for defamation, even though he ruined his life and he ruined his career. Also, how credible is David Leavitt in 2025 anyway? Let's get a bit more into his past. I brought some of it up on the previous episode, but he was also investigated at one point for an illegal adoption on tribal land, and this also involves bribery. In 2017, David Leavitt drove to the Northern Cheyenne Reservation in Montana to adopt a baby girl. Now, a few years later, he did an interview with a documentary filmmaker and told a pretty shocking story about how he went about getting physical custody of this Native American child. He describes himself going to the tribe's president and offering to use his connections in Ukraine, and hold any questions you have about his connections in Ukraine, because I'll explain those in a bit. But he offered to use these connections to broker an international sale of the tribe's buffalo meat. Now, at the same time he offers to broker this deal, he also says, hey, can I have your blessing to adopt this child? Now, the video of this interview that he did with the documentary film team, it was eventually leaked to a local television station, Fox 13, and the adoption became the subject of a federal investigation and a federal investigation into bribery. So, to a lot of people, his adoption story seemed to really run amiss of a federal law that was meant to protect Native American children from being removed from their tribe's care in favor of non-Native families. Additionally, the video of Leavitt that was leaked to the local news had him on the record stating, and this is just a completely different topic, but stating that he believed that ritualistic child abuse existed. And not only that, but he knew victims of it. This is very different than what he said during his 2022 press conference. However, in 2017, he had no idea that a victim impact statement existed and that he was named. But oh, how quickly does David Leavitt forget what he says. Back to his Ukrainian connections, and please keep this statistic in the back of your mind. Ukraine and Thailand are the top two countries for human and child trafficking. Ukraine is also a tier 2 country for human and child trafficking, and this pertains to the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, or TVPA, and TVPA cites that Tier 2 countries include governments that do not fully comply with all of the TVPA's minimum standards, but are making significant efforts to bring themselves into compliance with those standards. So overall, this means that the number of victims of severe forms of trafficking is significant in Ukraine and is increasing, and the government is aware, however, they are trying to mitigate. And in February of 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, UNICEF released a report that children were fleeing the country or attempting to because of war, and those children were at a greater risk of being trafficked. UNICEF's regional director for Europe and Central Asia had said, quote, "Displaced children are extremely vulnerable to being separated from their families, exploited, and trafficked. They need governments in the region to step up and put measures in place to keep them safe." End quote. Now, with all of this in mind, David Leavitt heads to Ukraine in May of 2022, just a few short months after this horrific war starts. And there's a lot of press surrounding his trip to Ukraine because his purpose of traveling there is to assist an anonymous donor in selecting 500 families who will receive financial support for at least an entire year. And according to Leavitt, this donor, the billionaire donor, wanted to remain private, focusing on helping rather than gaining recognition. And this is just per a press release from 2022 that I'll paraphrase from. Quote, "Leavitt will be on the ground in Ukraine to personally help identify 500 families in need. Once selected, the families will receive Visa gift cards for immediate financial relief, followed by bank accounts being set up for ongoing support." Leavitt said, "Our goal is to really humanize what these families are going through." Over the years, the Leavitts have built many friendships and even own a home in Kyiv, which he considers as much as a home as he has in Provo or Salt Lake City. Leavitt and his wife have strong ties to Ukraine, having worked on legal reform efforts there for 14 years through the Leavitt Institute for International Development. This marks Leavitt's second visit to Ukraine this year, and he previously traveled there just before the Russian invasion to handle personal matters related to his own home. Identifying and supporting these 500 families will be a major task, says Leavitt, but he and his team will review applications, hear personal stories, and determine who has lost everything and needs the most help. Well, that's very interesting, and you don't come across a lot of people who have strong connections to Ukraine, let alone a home there, who aren't Ukrainian. But there you have, a few months after Russia invaded Ukraine, Leavitt hops a plane to help these displaced families with an anonymous billionaire donor who is apparently funding everything. But also, I noticed in the press release or that article that I just paraphrased from, David Leavitt asks for donations to the cause by way of the Leavitt Institute. And I was really interested to know how the whole mission went, but I didn't really see any follow-up articles at all, except for one in 2023 that actually revealed the Utah billionaire that traveled to Ukraine and gave the money to these families. His name is Del Loy Hansen. Does that ring a bell to anyone? He is a very large real estate mogul. I mean, he pretty much owned half of Utah at one point. He is the former owner of the Utah Royals before they were Kansas City, and the former Utah Soccer Holdings owner before he was forced to sell both because of allegations of sexual harassment and racism. And he has an estimated net worth of $4 billion. But Hansen has a website, dlhfoundation.org, and there is a section with some information on the Ukrainian families that his program helped and his foundation assisted. And his foundation logo is at the top of this page, as well as the Leavitt Institute logo. And then there are family photos of Ukrainian families and a little bit of testimonies next to these photos. And then there's QR codes on a handful of these photos. So I put my phone up to the QR code so I could click on the link that it takes you to. And there seemed to be a redirect there, and it took me to Wikimedia Commons, but it was in another language, so I didn't know what the site was right away. So I was able to transcribe it, and I was like, oh, okay, Wikimedia Commons. I know they're owned by Wikipedia. I don't really come across that site very often, but it's described as, quote, an online repository of free use images, sound, and other media files. And I kept thinking, I feel like I've heard something about this site in the news. What is it? So when I Googled Wikimedia Commons, this popped up, and then I remembered why exactly the site was so familiar to me. On April 7th, 2010, Larry Sanger, who is the co-founder of Wikipedia, but by 2010 he had left, he sent a letter to the FBI, United States senators, and representatives saying that Wikimedia Commons hosted child rhymes with corn in the lolicon and edophilia categories on the site. What? Now, shortly after Sanger posted this letter to the FBI in public, a lot of criticism came in from multiple areas. And this ranged from assertions that he had mislabeled the lolicon as child corn to the contention that his actions were an attack on the Wikimedia Foundation caused by his history with Wikipedia since he had left. But he denied that the letter was an attempt to undermine Wikipedia. He did say that he had some ulterior motives, but none of that matters right now. I was just sitting here at my desk, a little shook to see that there was a known section on Wikimedia Commons at one point to view child rhymes with corn images. So why? Why would this QR code link out to that? Why would it redirect to that? I don't see Wikimedia Commons as a, quote, normal redirect in the United States, but maybe I'm wrong, and maybe outside of the US it is a common redirect. I just can't find anything about that. But it was just really strange that as I'm sitting here researching an episode about child abuse, that I'm led to a site where the first thing that pops up when you Google this site are allegations of child corn. But look, if Leavitt and Hansen were able to step up and help all of these Ukrainian families in need, then that's amazing. Who am I to look further into this? Part of me is just a healthy skeptic, and Leavitt's a politician. Politicians don't do things out of the kindness of their hearts. They have motives. And Hansen, well, read up on some of his allegations of racism and sexual harassment. And the fact that this whole trip wasn't widely publicized also gives me pause, because a lot of the time, these wealthy men and these politicians, they do things for press and for media, and they didn't exactly get that with this trip. I really only found 1 or 2 articles here. And the Hansen-Leavitt connection, it appears to be a purely political and business relationship. I didn't mention this on the first episode, but David Leavitt's brother Mike was the governor of Utah from 1993 to 2003, and Mike Leavitt once appointed Deloy Hansen to the state business board, where Hansen was actually the board's chairman. And Hansen also made a $10K donation to David Leavitt's election campaign. I thought that was kind of a small amount given he's a billionaire, but maybe there was a super PAC or something. But look, I think that I have thrown you enough information for one day. I've made a new playlist for this series on YouTube as well, so keep an eye out for more episodes, especially with David Lee Hamblin's upcoming pretrial hearing. I know that they may not be able to share much or share anything at all, but I do have emails out to the prosecutors involved in this case, as well as Sheriff Mike Smith. Sometimes they'll be kind enough to share witness lists. I mean, I am just looking for anything that I can get my hands on here. And if you have any information regarding anything pertaining to the Hamblin case or anything I've discussed on these last two episodes, please email me at lauren@popcrime.tv. All right, guys, thanks again for listening. Stay vigilant and stay safe.